Harper by R.M. Green. Harper didn't look at the face of the man who was about to shoot him. He had always imagined that when staring death in the face, one would look at the face of the harbinger itself. Harper was surprised that he felt no terror or anguish about the prospect of his imminent and violent demise. In fact, he felt more vexed that he was about to die without having done so many of the things that he had dreamed of doing. He felt rather angry that the about-to-be murderer was so inconsiderate of the plans he had made for the next few years, and most of all, he felt a mild curiosity about the fact that he was not looking at the assassin's face, which was unmasked and just a few feet above where Harper knelt on the dirty garage floor, his hands clasped above his head. He wasn't even looking at the dull, black 9mm Glock, which he remembered was Austrian and had a magazine capacity of 17 bullets. Then he asked himself why this piece of trivia should pop into his brain at such a moment, and decided it was probably a distraction mechanism to deflect his attention from adjacent doom. What he was looking at with almost complete absorption and utter fascination was the stitching on the black glove of the hand holding the pistol. The glove was not particularly remarkable, almost certainly genuine leather, but the stitching had become a little worn in one place on the second knuckle of the ring finger, and one stitch had worked itself partly loose and looped up from the glove, leaving the tiniest of gaps between the thread and the leather. It was through this tiny eyelet that Harper concentrated his gaze, as if seeing what was on the other side was all that mattered, temporarily oblivious to his predicament. "I wish he would get on with it already," Harper thought to himself. "My knees are killing me." Still, the gloved hand held the gun a few inches from Harper's forehead, and Harper noticed that the gloved hand was rock steady. Obviously a professional, he thought to himself. If it had been Harper about to kill someone, he felt sure he would have been shaking like a leaf, and when it came to it, he couldn't have pulled the trigger no matter what the motivation to do so. Harper considered trying to plead his case all over again, to say for the 100th time that it was all a case of mistaken identity, that whoever they were after, it wasn't him. Maybe he looked like the chap or had a similar name, but whatever someone had seen, said or done to warrant such a grisly end in an abandoned garage in a dingy northern Paris suburb, that someone wasn't Harper. He was about to open his mouth, but he changed his mind. Frankly, the whole thing was becoming rather a bore. Why didn't the bastard shoot? Although the hand holding the gun did not waver a millimetre. Harper sensed something was holding the killer back. Definitely not conscience, Harper reflected. But what then? Doubt? Maybe he was going over all the protestations of innocence that Harper had babbled in the preceding 2 hours, when he was snatched off the quiet side street in broad daylight and subjected to a very uncomfortable car ride, mostly face down in the back of a Peugeot, what was it, a 407? The saloon one, anyway, the one that junior executives get, whose grade doesn't qualify for a BMW yet, not even if they pay the difference to go up a grade. Again Harper marvelled at his own capacity for trivia, particularly at such a time. In the 2 hours or so since the man had come up to him and stuck the pistol in his back and just said one word, "Marsh," he had uttered not a word. The same was true of the driver. All Harper had seen of him was the greasy brown hair poking out from a blue and white toque, which looked like it had been knitted by an elderly female relative, and the reflection of his watery blue eyes and unkempt brows in the rear-view mirror. The fact he hadn't been blindfolded or hooded, Harper took to be a very bad sign indeed. Whatever the hesitation was, it now appeared to be past, as Harper saw the fingers on the pistol move slightly, as if the man holding the gun were making sure of his grip. Harper closed his eyes and felt no more than vague disappointment that his entire life was not flashing before him in a super fast-forwarded special effect moment. There was no cocking of the pistol. The Glock isn't automatic. You just squeeze gently on the trigger. Harper heard the other man take a deep breath and hold it. He did the same. The maddeningly annoying tinny chimes of the Nokia ringtone surprised both of them. Harper had spent his first few days in Paris in a sort of happy trance. His French was decidedly average, but he always accompanied every foray into the Gallic tongue with such a disarming smile and deference that even the usually contemptuous shop assistants and petty officials who seemed to make up most of the people he met warmed to him and were for the most part amazingly helpful. Harper had had the foresight to arrange his accommodation via the internet, through an experienced firm of professional relocation specialists before leaving England, rather than brave the jungle of private ads or local estate agents who demanded such an assortment of documents and guarantees that many less fortunate flat seekers had despaired and given up. After his girlfriend of 7 years, Miranda, had moved out and up, she was now dating a minor marquis, he had let his flat in Fulham and the rent more than covered the mortgage. He took voluntary redundancy, which was just as well, because at 38 he already felt past it in the world of ethical commodity trading, especially when they introduced him to his new boss, Sean, a 26-year-old half-American, half-Welsh MBA with dreadlocks and a tattoo of a satyr doing unspeakable things to an angel on her permanently exposed shoulders, and whose father was the major shareholder in the company, and the generous payment that went with it, and had set off for Paris to write a book about a witty, charming sales executive who gives it all up to go to Paris to write a book. Not original, perhaps, but it was his dream, and he had enough money not to worry about work for a while. He had inherited a reasonably profitable portfolio from his thrifty and prudent Scottish grandfather, and if he was not too extravagant, Harper figured he could live modestly for quite a few years, and even then he could always sell the flat. After 2 months he had established a pleasant routine. He would get up early and plunge into the shower, then run down the stairs 3 at a time before emerging onto the Rue Rivoli, crossing the river at the Pont Neuf, and having coffee and pain au chocolat at a little café on the Ile de la Cité. Sometimes picking up a few groceries on the way home, Harper would bound up the stairs, again 3 at a time, well, until the 4th floor, after which the bounding slowed to a trudge, and spend an hour or so reading or dealing with any correspondence. Loathing email, except for work or administrative-related matters, Harper preferred to write long letters on good quality paper with a fountain pen. He always believed that it was more personal, and that he crafted his missives with more attention than simply tapping out the equivalent of an electronic postcard to the people he cared about. After that, Harper would take his orange and red Oxford-lined A4 writing pad and a few ballpoints — refilling fountain pens when out and about became rather a nuisance — and head off for either the Tuileries or the Jardin de Luxembourg, if the weather was dry, or one of the famous cafes like the Zammer or the Sarah Bernhard if it was wet. He would take up residence in one of the comfortable green metal-slatted chairs strewn about the parks, or in a plush red velvet booth in the Zammer, and chewing absent-mindedly on the pen-top he would set to writing. Often he came up with whole paragraphs, sometimes just a few sentences or even individual words, and often the mental wanderings manifested themselves in the forms of doodles, scribbles, and other undecipherable scrawls. Some days there would be nothing more than just lists. Harper liked making lists. Lists of his favourite films, the top 3 at that moment being The Third Man, The Jungle Book, and North by Northwest, or the number of capital cities he'd visited, 17, or his former girlfriends. He wasn't totally sure, but he thought 6 if you count snogging Ingrid Spencer at the youth club disco when he was 13, and a one-night stand with a slightly drunk Bulgarian girl he had met interrailing in Zurich, and who, to his shock and dismay, had demanded 300 Swiss francs the next morning as payment for services rendered. Skipping lunch if he was in a park, or ordering a sandwich and a small glass of red wine or a kir in a cafe, Harper would pack up his tools around 5 o'clock in the afternoon and take a wander around the Latin Quarter to watch the world go by, and to browse in one of the many little curio boutiques and bookshops in the area. Often he would call in at the cramped treasure trove of an English bookstore run by a somewhat cynical and diffident, yet gracious and charming, Canadian woman called Lisa, who had arrived in Paris 20 years earlier on holiday and somehow forgot to go home. Lisa had married well and divorced better, and was always colourfully dressed like a rich woman's idea of a gypsy. She was around 45 and lived with her Mexican girlfriend Inez, who taught Spanish at the Sorbonne by day and the tango at a little club in the 19th arrondissement at the weekends. Harper would stop by for half an hour or so and drink a few cups of coffee with maple syrup and chat to Lisa, who was an absolute mine of useful local information, from the best dry cleaner to where to find the essential expat products such as PG Tips, Coleman's mustard, and Bassett's licorice all sorts. Inez would sometimes be there. She was strikingly beautiful with jet black hair and a plait to her waist, and looked the epitome of a leading lady from a Zorro film. Harper was half in love with her, as were many men and women, but Inez only had eyes for Lisa, and the two of them had been together for 10 years, and she had an oddly decorated yet welcoming 3-room apartment nearby with 2 ageing stray cats. By 7, Harper was usually hungry and returning home. He would make himself something to eat, unless he accepted a rare invitation to dinner. He hadn't yet entertained anyone at his place, partly because he was still finding his feet, and partly because he was enjoying the solitude. Thanks to the patient instruction of Lisa and Inès, he had a rapidly expanding repertoire of dishes which had gone from a baguette and cheese and maybe a few olives to elaborate salads, salmon in almond sauce and chicken a la king in just a few weeks. Harper hadn't smoked since he was a student, apart from a very occasional cigar, but he did like a drop of wine. He would drink a couple of glasses with dinner, then he would spend an hour or so typing what he'd written that day into his laptop. At 10 he might go out again for a nightcap and find a quiet or lively cafe, depending on his mood, with or without people he knew. He'd met a few people at the bookshop, and most of them were permanent expats who used the bookshop more or less as an unofficial social club, a place to chat, drink coffee and moan about the French, which is the favourite pastime of foreigners in Paris. Harper had met few French people, but one couple, Patrick and Hélène Bernard, who worked for a satellite TV station and who lived in his building, had invited him for dinner one night and seemed to have taken on the responsibility for finding him a French girlfriend, to improve his knowledge of the language and culture. Consequently, that very evening, he was due to meet the Bernards for an apéro, and they had invited a simply lovely girl, Audrey. She works in the news department, and elle est charmante, and she will just love you, the Bernards had enthused. Both men looked somewhat irritated and bemused by this Finnish musical interruption to the serious business of murder at hand. Harper suddenly felt like giggling, but thought better of it when he opened his eyes and saw the Glock still levelled at his forehead. Harper knew it wasn't his phone, since his had some nondescript jazzy factory preset which he had yet to work out how to change. Besides, it had been switched off when the man had taken it off him, when he bundled him into the car along with his wallet and his Oxford writing pad, which now lay in shreds in the corner of the filthy garage, illuminated by a single naked low-wattage light bulb. Angrily, and without lowering the pistol, the assassin reached into his inside coat pocket with his free hand, and with some difficulty, encumbered by his glove as he was, extracted the still ringing mobile. Not taking his eyes off Harper for an instant, he pressed a button, and holding the phone to his ear, he didn't utter a word of greeting. He listened for a full minute, with no change of expression on his expressionless face, and finally grunted, "D'accord," into the phone, before pressing another button and thrusting the phone into a side pocket of his navy trench coat, which, given the struggle he had had to withdraw it from its original interior pocket, seemed the easiest course of action. Still looking intently at Harper, he slowly shook his head. Then, closing one eye, he extended the hand holding the pistol to its full extent until the end of the barrel was pressing lightly into Harper's forehead. Harper kept his eyes open this time, and again found his mind sidetracked from his certain and immediate death to being slightly surprised that the gunmetal did not feel as cold as he had imagined. "Fermez les yeux. Your eyes, close them, please," said the man in a dull monotone. At least he's polite. He said please, thought Harper, and then wished he had thought of something more profound and revelatory, since it was to be his final thought. He felt a blow like a hammer against his skull, and blinding flashing light splintered like a million fireworks in his brain, and he felt no more. The Bernards were bustling about their apartment 2 floors below Harper's flat, getting things ready for the evening ahead. Patrick had already opened a bottle of Chateauneuf de Pape and was busy uncorking a nicely chilled Chablis. Hélène Bernard was laying the table with various tasty morsels, such as olives stuffed with feta cheese, avocado dip, and a dozen fresh oysters she had picked up on the way home from work at the Place d'Éterne. Audrey was due in 30 minutes, at 7:30. Hélène had invited her half an hour before the time they had agreed with Harper, because she wanted to give her a full brief on her prospective English beau, and to ply her with a glass or two to slightly loosen her inhibitions. Audrey was a good-looking, intelligent woman of 30 who had a tendency to be rather severe with men, since she had spent most of her adolescence and adulthood fighting off their largely unwanted attentions. She had scared off most of the self-styled eligible bachelors and all of the married men at the office, and wasn't looking for a man. However, Audrey was a romantic at heart and believed that she would meet someone when she least expected it, and so never went looking. Patrick and Hélène loved her like a sister, and had determined to find her a decent man. Why they felt the need to act as matchmaker to the people they cared for was rather a mystery, but Hélène suspected it was because, unable to have children themselves, they sought and found vicarious pleasure in trying to bring about the happiness of their friends. And unusually for modern-day matchmakers, they were incredibly successful. So far, even the would-be romances that they had tried to bring about, which never came to be, had always ended in friendship, and not once had they had to face any unpleasant fallout from their well-intentioned meddling. They cared deeply for Audrey, and they had found Harper delightful, elegant, lonely, and immensely engaging. And Hélène thought him dashingly handsome, without a trace of vanity. He wasn't looking for a wife, a lover, or a mother, or the usual dream woman for a Parisian man, a combination of the three. Harper was happy being in Paris and enjoying his newfound freedom, and both Patrick and Hélène were sure that he and Audrey would hit it off. At 7:10, the buzzer sounded at the door. It was the doorbell to the apartment, and not the buzzer on the street, so that meant either it had to be one of the building residents, or perhaps Audrey arriving early, as she knew the door code. But arriving early in Paris was unheard of. Slightly puzzled, Patrick set down the bottle of Chablis as it gently sweated condensation, and went to the door. One of the guests was early. Harper fell over the threshold and collapsed unconscious on the floor of the narrow harlequin-tiled hallway. He had blood oozing from a nasty-looking gash above his right temple. Hélène gave a little scream, but at the same moment reached for the phone on the cherrywood table by the door and dialed for an ambulance. Patrick, who had served for 3 years in the Navy and knew a thing or two about not panicking and treating wounds, didn't try to move Harper, who had twisted as he had fallen and was half on his side. Patrick, as gently as if he were handling a newborn chick, manoeuvred the prone figure into the recovery position and went to fetch some ice to hold against the wound. Finding that the remaining ice had been used up for the oysters, he grabbed the bottle of Chablis, which still had the corkscrew in it, and, wrapping it in a tea towel, held it against the crimson-soaked temple of the unconscious man. The ambulance arrived within 10 minutes. By that time, Harper, feeling sick and looking paler than Darius, one of Lisa's cats, who was a true albino, had regained painful consciousness and was trying to recollect who he was and how he had got to be lying on the floor of these nice people's flat with blood all over his face. Audrey, dressed in a black and white striped light woolen dress with her hair up in a careless yet elegant chignon, arrived just as the paramedics were taking Harper out on a stretcher. Even the gracious hosts, Patrick and Hélène, delayed the extraction of the victim for a few moments as they effected introductions. Harper managed a crooked smile and a slightly slurred enchanté before slipping comfortably back onto the stretcher and into painless oblivion. Harper was back on his feet and out of hospital the next day. He sported an impressive rainbow-coloured black eye and several stitches, and was almost disappointed when the doctors told him that he wouldn't have a scar. He told the doctors at the hospital and the concerned Patrick, who had insisted on coming in the ambulance with him, that he couldn't remember what had happened, but he thought that he had probably been mugged and had his phone and wallet stolen by someone who had hit him from behind, since he didn't remember seeing anyone. He gave the briefest of statements to a rather grave young police officer who spoke surprisingly good English, who told him that it was very unfortunate, but since Harper could not remember seeing his attacker or attackers, there was little the police could do except to sympathise. Harper thanked the officer for his kind words and repeated the mugging story to Patrick, and later the following evening again to Hélène, and yet again to Audrey a few days after that, when the four of them gathered in the Bernards' apartment for dinner. Several months passed in a most pleasant fashion, as Harper was not plagued by nightmares about his all-too-near-death experience, and he resumed writing his book, enjoying his surroundings and rapidly improving his French, thanks to seeing Audrey on a very regular basis. They weren't exactly an item, but they were happy and relaxed in each other's company, and according to the contented and not dispassionate opinion of Hélène, it was only a matter of time before they would become an official couple. One murky and drizzly autumn evening, Harper was walking along the Seine on the Quai aux Fleurs near Notre Dame, with a bottle of champagne in one hand and a carrier bag full to the seams with raspberries, mushrooms and fresh shrimps in the other. He was going to attempt his most ambitious meal yet. He was making dinner for Audrey, who had become an occasional overnight guest at his flat, and tonight it was her Saint's Day, which serves as a sort of unofficial second birthday for many Catholics, even non-practising ones, since it is a splendid excuse for a party. Harper had consulted with Ineth and Lisa and was going to make a champagne shrimp and mushroom pasta with shallots and parsley and a raspberry and champagne sorbet for dessert. He was whistling softly as he sauntered along and trying not to feel too pleased with himself. He stopped across the street when he felt a sudden firm pressure in the small of his back. His mouth went dry, his scalp prickled with sweat, and he clutched onto the champagne bottle and the carrier bag handle as tightly as he could. Not again, please, no! Had the assassin returned to finish the job this time? Please do not turn around, mon ami. It was the same expressionless voice, yet still polite. Harper thought his coping mechanism of concentrating on the minutiae of the man's manners having kicked in. I know you have said nothing to the police. That is good. I am very sorry about it all. You were not the right person. Please forgive me, and you shall not have any more problem from me again. Now I ask you to stay where you are and count to 20. Merci. Harper felt the pressure on his lower back disappear, and try as he might, he heard nothing. He closed his eyes and counted to 20 aloud and slowly. As he reached 20, he opened his eyes again and without looking round took a deep breath and crossed the road and went back to his flat. When he unpacked the groceries, he found his wallet with all its contents and his mobile phone in amongst the mushrooms. Harper never heard or saw the man who so nearly shot him again, and he and Audrey got married the following summer. The Bernards acted as official witnesses. Audrey gained a promotion in the news department, and Harper gave up writing his novel, as it seemed rather tame. He got occasional work consulting for his former employers and took a substantial chunk of his inheritance and invested it in Lisa's bookshop as a partner. Lisa and Ineth wanted to go and spend a year travelling in Mexico, so Harper looked after the cats and ran the shop while they were away, and would sit there behind the desk, the new local oracle for expats, fresh off the Eurostar, who might be feeling a little lost and in need of a kind word and a hot cup of tea. About 10 months after installing himself behind the cramped wooden desk of the Coin Anglais bookshop, Harper was browsing through various book catalogues online when his mobile buzzed, a text message. Probably another promotional offer, he thought. He must receive a dozen a week. It read, Monsieur, you are a man of great discretion and outstanding qualities and courage, as you have shown us. If you are interested in a special and highly profitable venture, please meet my associate on the Pont Neuf at 6 this evening. I am sure you will recognize him. There is no obligation, and this invitation will not be extended again. The bell above the door rang as another customer stepped inside. Harper looked around the shop, thought about Audrey, thought about how far he had come, about what he wanted from life. Then he moved his thumb across the keypad on his phone and pressed a button. Are you sure you want to delete this message? Appeared on the screen. One more keystroke. OK. And it was done. Harper looked up at a slightly lost-looking backpacker. Yes, miss. Can I help?